And the lessons today are from First Kings 9 and Second Chronicles 8. So in the first part of First Kings 9, we see an overlap of the second part of Second Chronicles 7. So today we don't see a concurrence, like I said yesterday. We see God, and this was when God appeared to Solomon after his building project was complete and gave him the conditions and requirements of the law. God's promises basically were predicated on Solomon's obedience, Solomon and the people of Israel's obedience. Now, Second Chronicles 8 provides a lot more detail and what appeared to be the first, what appeared at first to be a contradiction in verse 2. And this was about the transaction between Solomon and Hiram, or Huram, depending on what version that you read. In 1 Kings 9, it says that Solomon gave the cities to Hiram, most likely as payment for his services after his vast expenditure for this building project. He most likely sold them to Hiram, who in turn didn't want them and probably gave them back to him. Hence, what I said was the contradiction, because the first one says, "Oh, he gave them," and Hiram was like, "What sort of cities are these?" I think that's where the word "Kabul" came from, as in, "What are these?" And then in Second Chronicles, it says, "Oh, he built the cities which Hiram had given to him." So, just putting two together, it seems like Hiram had given it back to him on some. I ain't trying to take the cities. I don't like them. Anyway, another interesting fact was that Solomon built the house for his first wife, Pharaoh's daughter, outside of the city. Now, when we read about it initially, I thought he had built them kind of side by side. But we know this because in verse 11 of 2 Chronicles 8, he said she couldn't live in any place that the ark of the Lord had entered because she was a pagan. She was Egyptian after all. And so I feel like she was most likely still practicing those pagan, doing those pagan sacrifices and, whatever's to their god, and which was why she had to be like outside, sacrificing to their idols. It took Solomon 20 years to finish building the temple and his palace and all the buildings. And we get some clarification now on a separate note, right? Remember I mentioned a few days ago. Let me just read. We get some clarification on the conscription of the people Solomon used to build the temple. Now, 5 days ago, I mentioned about how and when I was sharing from 1 Kings 5 and 6 and also 2 Chronicles 2 to 3, I mentioned that he used forced labor, unlike his father David, who only used forced labor of the cities that captured. But here we see that he only used the forced labor on his fellow Israelites as part of the conscription, but not in the way that we thought. So in 1 Kings 9:22, we see that this conscription of the Israelites was for temporary labor, and he didn't use them for manual labor. They were his men of war, servants, officers, captains, and commanders of his cavalry and chariots, and this wasn't on a permanent basis. It was just very temporary. It was the foreigners who had been driven out of the land which he used for forced manual labor. Those are the remnants of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, and all the other people that they couldn't drive out. He also built a fleet of ships, we noticed, and partnered with Hiram for international trade. The seaport of Ezion-Geber, mentioned in the Bible, is situated around modern-day Aqaba. And remember, I my last trip, which I always keep going on about, was to Jordan, and Aqaba was one of the cities that we visited. Beautiful coastal cities, and and there were lots of like quarries and lots of activities going on, which from what I read in the Bible seems like, that was the area, because they kind of married it together. And in my imagination, I thought, oh, I've been to this place or somewhere around this place. We also learned that Solomon enlisted the help of the Phoenicians to construct the merchant fleet and carry out active trade with southern Arabia. Now here's my hashtag getting to know God lesson. God is a God of relationships. In his conversation with Solomon, which we read and reread in both books, we see that after he tells Solomon that he has heard his prayers, he goes on to give him the conditions of the law, and then further lets him know what will happen to the people when they disobey. He already knew, so this wasn't like a surprise to him, God, but he was sharing it with Solomon. God has conditions and requirements for his children, and this is because he's not just after our obedience, like I've said before many times. He's after our hearts. We need to have hearts of obedience, hearts that are willing and are truly, after what he wants and following his will. He told Solomon in advance how he was going to operate in relationship with the Israelites. And I believe that the same goes for us today. He always acts with mercy when it comes to us, because God will bless us today knowing that tomorrow we're going to be unfaithful and forget him or whatever, but it doesn't stop him from blessing us. How awesomely comforting is that? Thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow we're going back to the Proverbs, and I'll be sharing lessons from Proverbs 25 and 26. I look forward to sharing them with you. Have a wonderful day. Bye.